Hey guys, let's start with a story tonight. The silver mirror was used by the Lord and the church to oppress the villagers, and after being exposed and sealed by Father Jacques and the herbalist Alana, the device was out of control and reflected in reverse to the experimenter's own sin. And finally, this moral observation experiment across time and space is still quietly continuing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And tell me in the comments where you started tuning in and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world join us. The shadow of the Black Death had hovered over Valentine village for 3 years, like a dirty old cloak that could never be washed clean, soaked in the stench of death, weighing heavily on everyone's heart. The weeds in the fields had overgrown the furrows, gnawing the once neat ridges into fragmented pieces. The wheat stubble left from last year's harvest whimpered in the wind, like the whispers of the dead. The once bustling blacksmith shop was reduced to half a collapsed wall. Spider webs in the corner were tangled with dead leaves and the debris of time, and the anvil inside was covered with thick rust, a half-finished horseshoe embedded in its dents, left by Martin the blacksmith's father, who hadn't survived the second wave of the plague. The church was the only building in the village that still retained some semblance of order, though ferns had grown in the cracks of the bell tower. Every time the wind blew, the clapper's sound echoed like an old man's dying gasps, drifting intermittently across the empty village lanes, startling a few vultures that circled the gray sky before settling back on the cemetery at the village entrance. The cemetery had long run out of space. New graves were squeezed between the old ones, their simple wooden markers tilting crookedly, most without even full names. After wind and rain, the inscriptions had blurred into clouds of smoke. Father Jacques wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, the sweat mixing with dust to streak his cheeks with 2 muddy lines. He watched as 3 workers lifted a broken stone pillar into the church courtyard with ropes, their footsteps heavy and dragging on the stone pavement, weary with exhaustion. The Black Death had claimed the previous priest, most of the parishioners, and the village's young laborers. These 3 workers were among the lucky few who had survived the plague. 2 had lost their wives and children, and the 3rd had lost a finger, always unconsciously hunching his arm as he worked. Jacques had been sent from a neighboring village 3 months earlier. Before his departure, the bishop had patted him on the shoulder and said, "Valentine needs God's light." But upon his arrival, he found nothing but a desolate ruin. Officially, he was to oversee the church's restoration. In reality, he was little more than a guardian of this forgotten altar. The workers' footsteps startled a few sparrows, which fluttered past the wall behind the altar, where the plaster had peeled off in large chunks, revealing dark red bricks. Blackened grass clippings were wedged between the bricks, along with several dark stains that might have been blood. No one could say for sure if they belonged to plague victims or were from an earlier time. Jacques' gaze lingered on those stains for a moment. He instinctively made the sign of the cross on his chest and murmured atonement verses from the Bible. "Father, there's something here," a worker named Pierre suddenly exclaimed, his voice tinged with an imperceptible tremor. Jacques set aside his prayer book and walked over. Pierre was carefully chipping away at the remaining plaster on the wall with a small shovel. When the shovel struck something hard, it emitted a soft tap-tap sound. As the debris crumbled away, a silver mirror embedded in the wall gradually came into view. The mirror was roughly half a person's height, its frame carved in the shape of intertwined vines, filled with dark brown grime and covered in patina. In some places, the patina had flaked off, revealing the dull silver underneath, like scabs falling from an old man's face. The mirror's surface was coated with a thick layer of dirt, hardened into a translucent crust, vaguely reflecting the shadows of those around it, like a moon submerged in murky water, blurred and eerie beyond words. Pierre's breathing grew rapid, his hand clutching the shovel trembling slightly. He had lost his wife to the plague and felt an extreme fear of anything unusual, dreading it might be a creation of the devil while secretly hoping it was God's salvation. "Is it a holy relic?" another worker asked softly. After the Black Death, people held a mixture of awe and fear for any ancient object, longing for protection yet dreading disaster. Jacques reached out and gently touched the mirror's frame. A cold sensation spread up his fingertips. "Perhaps it was left by the previous priest," he said. "Let's clean it first, carefully." The workers fetched linen cloths and water, wiping the mirror's surface meticulously. When the damp cloth passed over the patina, it left streaks of dark green, and the water quickly turned murky. Pierre was in charge of wiping the mirror itself, his movements unusually gentle, as if caressing a newborn baby. When the last piece of grime was removed, the silver mirror suddenly emitted a faint white light, soft yet penetratingly cool, instantly dispelling the stuffiness in the church. Jacques stepped back instinctively, feeling goosebumps rise on his skin. Immediately afterward, several lines of grayish-white text slowly appeared on the mirror's surface, as if written in chalk yet glowing with an otherworldly luster, their edges shimmering with a faint silver radiance that pulsed like a breath. Strangely, the moment the text appeared, an extremely soft hum filled the church, like countless tiny mosquitoes buzzing in the ears, or distant mountain stream water flowing, faint and indistinct. "Martin the blacksmith stole the widow's inheritance," Pierre read aloud, his voice trembling more noticeably, his tone wavering at the end. Martin the blacksmith was a burly man with muscles as solid as iron. He had narrowly survived the Black Death without losing any family, even taking over his neighbor's blacksmith shop after the entire family perished in the plague. He usually put on a hearty demeanor, occasionally tossing roasted sweet potatoes to the village children. No one had suspected him of such a deed. As soon as Pierre finished speaking, another worker suddenly gasped, his face turning ashen. I saw Martin loitering near the widow's house a few days after her husband was buried. At the time, I thought he was going to help." His words were like a spark falling into dry kindling, instantly igniting the men's emotions, fear and unease spreading among them. Jacques' heart raced, as if a rabbit were leaping wildly in his chest, pounding against his ribs. He leaned closer to the mirror, and by the faint light filtering through the church's stained glass windows, he made out another line of text. "The deacon worships the old gods in the forest at night." The deacon was an elderly servant of the church who had served the previous priest for many years, his hair and beard white with age. He always appeared extremely pious, rising before dawn to clean the church, praying longer than anyone else, and even trembling slightly with devotion when distributing communion. Jacques recalled seeing the deacon sneaking out of the church with a cloth bag a few nights earlier. At the time, he had thought the deacon was going to tend to a sick parishioner, but now he realized the direction led to the Black Forest outside the village. The Black Forest was a forbidden place. Villagers said it was home to old gods and devils, and no one dared to approach it during the plague. Is this God's revelation?" the third worker muttered, instinctively making the sign of the cross. Jacques said nothing. He stared at the text, feeling a chill creep up from his feet, along his leg bones, and finally into the back of his neck, making him shiver. The words seemed alive, flowing slightly on the mirror's surface, with tiny silver sparks occasionally bursting between the strokes, like shattered starlight. After a moment, the text began to fade, its edges blurring first, then slowly dissolving into the mirror, leaving only a smooth surface, as if everything had been an illusion. Once the mirror calmed, the hum also disappeared, and silence returned to the church, broken only by the men's breathing and the wind outside. Jacques forced himself to calm down, clutching the cross in his hand so tightly that his fingertips turned white. "Don't speak of this," he told the workers. "Clean up here first and cover the mirror with a cloth. I will pray to God for guidance." His voice carried an imperceptible tremor, and he didn't notice that as he said, "Pray to God." His eyes instinctively avoided the mirror, The workers dared not ask further, nodding hastily. They fetched a thick black cloth and carefully draped it over the silver mirror. The moment the cloth fell, Jacques felt a weight lift from his chest. The workers resumed their tasks, but their movements were more silent. No longer chatting as before, only the dull clinking of tools echoing. Jacques, however, could no longer focus on prayer. He sat on a chair in front of the altar, his prayer book open on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor. The words on the mirror, along with Pierre's and the other workers' remarks, replayed repeatedly in his mind. Martin the blacksmith and the deacon were both prominent figures in the village, one sustaining the village's iron supply through his blacksmith shop, the other a symbol of the church. Could they truly have done such things against the teachings? Or was the mirror not a creation of God at all, but a temptation of the devil? He remembered a line from the previous priest's diary. The devil often appears in the guise of light, tempting the world to stray from the path. The words stuck in his heart like a thorn. The next 3 days passed in an eerie calm in Valentine village. The sun rose and set as usual, and the occasional crow of roosters or bark of dogs sounded deliberately suppressed, like the calm before a storm. When villagers met on the road, they only nodded hastily, their eyes darting away, afraid to speak, each seemingly hiding a secret, fearing it would be exposed if they opened their mouths. Jacques several times wanted to confront Martin and the deacon, but each time he reached their doorsteps, he hesitated. Standing outside Martin's blacksmith shop, he could hear the ding-dong of hammering, louder than usual, as if trying to cover something up. He raised his hand to knock, but as his fingertips touched the cold wooden door, he remembered the words on the mirror and Martin's burly arms. If Martin had truly stolen the inheritance, would he turn violent? At the deacon's door, he found the door tightly shut, no light seeping through the cracks, as if the inhabitant had vanished. He feared his accusations might drive the deacon to extremes, and even more, he feared confirming the truth of the words. If someone as pious as the deacon was worshipping old gods, what did that make his own unwavering faith? Torn between fear of the truth and anxiety about sparking village panic, he endured torment. Until the early morning of the 4th day, a series of urgent knocks shattered the church's tranquility, heavy and insistent, as if trying to smash through the wooden door. "Father, Father, something terrible has happened," a villager's voice shouted from outside, choked with sobs. Jacques hurried to open the door, finding several villagers standing outside, their faces ashen. The leader said, Martin fell into the abandoned mine shaft. He's dead." Jacques' heart contracted sharply, as if squeezed by a cold hand. He followed the villagers to the abandoned mine shaft outside the village, where a few early risers had already gathered, their faces filled with terror. Jacques looked down in the direction they pointed and saw Martin's body lying at the bottom of the shaft. His limbs twisted into unnatural angles, as if broken by force. His face still bore an expression of horror, his eyes wide open as if he had seen something unspeakably terrifying. A large wound on his forehead had congealed into dark brown blood, staining the surrounding soil. The shaft's entrance was overgrown with weeds and several waist-high shrubs. Few people ventured there on a normal day. Legend had it the mine was haunted, and several miners had disappeared there. Why would Martin suddenly go there? A villager whispered, "Yesterday evening, I saw Martin sneaking this way, carrying a cloth bag. I don't know what was in it." Another villager chimed in, "It must be because he stole the widow's inheritance. His guilty conscience made him come here to burn incense and repent, but God punished him." The words made the others nod in agreement, their fear gradually turning to awe. Before Jacques could recover from the shock, more bad news arrived in the afternoon. The deacon had suddenly developed a high fever, lying in bed delirious, and the herbalist summoned could do nothing. Jacques rushed to the deacon's house immediately. Pushing open the door, he was hit by a strong smell of herbs and sweat. The deacon lay on the bed, his face flushed, lips chapped, muttering incoherently about "sparing me, old gods," and "I'll never dare again." His hands flailed wildly in the air, as if fending off something. The herbalist sat beside the bed, shaking his head at Jacques. "Father, he's possessed by an evil spirit, not an ordinary illness. I can do nothing." The deacon's wife sat nearby, weeping bitterly. Last night, he came back from outside acting strange, saying someone was following him, that he saw dark shadows. Jacques looked at the delirious deacon, then thought of the words on the mirror, and a growing chill settled in his heart. The villagers erupted in chaos. Someone remembered the text on the church's silver mirror, and the news spread like wildfire through the village, faster than the plague itself. It's divine punishment. Definitely divine punishment. Martin stole the widow's inheritance. The deacon worshipped old gods. God warned them through the mirror. Panic gripped the entire village. No one dared to go out at night, and some even sprinkled salt at their doorsteps, claiming it would ward off evil spirits. Strangely, however, the once deserted church suddenly became bustling with worshippers. Villagers arrived with pious yet fearful expressions to pray, offering the little grain they had as sacrifices, and flocking to Jacques to ask about the mirror. Some knelt before the altar, kowtowing repeatedly until their foreheads were red, confessing trivial mistakes. Others gathered around the covered mirror, craning their necks to peek, their eyes filled with curiosity and awe. Jacques looked at the mirror behind the altar, now empty beneath the black cloth. Yet it felt like a silent eye, watching everything. Standing on the altar, watching the villagers dominated by fear, his heart was filled with mixed emotions. He wanted to tell them the mirror might not be a holy relic of God, but the words stuck in his throat. He had no proof, and he knew that in such a state of panic, any doubt would be deemed blasphemy. At that moment, the sound of horse hooves approached from the village entrance, growing closer, breaking the village's oppression. The hooves clattered on the stone pavement, carrying an undeniable authority. Jacques looked up and saw Lord Renard riding toward him with several confidants. Leading them, Lord Renard wore a black leather armor, a long sword hanging at his waist, its scabbard inlaid with several cheap gems that glinted in the sunlight. He was the ruler of this land. During the Black Death, he had hidden in his castle, safe and sound thanks to stored grain and medicine, only venturing out occasionally to inspect once the situation stabilized. Tall and imposing, a scar ran from his forehead to his chin, left from his days as a crusader in his youth, making him look both majestic and ferocious. When the villagers saw Lord Renard, they quickly stepped aside, their eyes filled with awe in these turbulent times. A lord's power offered more security than God's light. "Father Jacques, I hear there has been a miracle in the church?" Lord Renard dismounted and strode toward Jacques, his voice loud enough for all nearby villagers to hear. Jacques hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "My lord, there is an ancient silver mirror behind the altar. It displays text, and afterward, those mentioned meet misfortune." Lord Renard approached the mirror, examining it carefully, then turned to the crowd of onlookers and shouted, "This is no ordinary mirror. It is the mirror of God, sent by the Almighty to guide us and judge sin." His voice was powerful, instantly calming the villagers' panicked emotions. From this day forth, a confession and mirror-gazing ceremony shall be held every week. All villagers must come to confess their sins and receive God's guidance. The villagers fell to their knees, shouting "God bless us" at the top of their lungs, their voices filled with relief at having escaped disaster. Jacques stood aside, watching Lord Renard being surrounded by the villagers like a star, yet a trace of doubt lingered in his heart. Lord Renard's reaction had been too quick, as if he had known about the mirror all along. That night, Jacques went to the church alone. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting dappled shadows on the floor, intertwined red, blue, and purple light patterns, like devilish symbols. The church was empty, his footsteps echoing alone. He walked to the silver mirror and slowly lifted the black cloth. The mirror glowed coldly in the moonlight, reflecting his pale face. Just as he was about to reach out and touch it, he suddenly heard a strange sound, as if many people were whispering in the distance, their voices indistinct yet carrying an inexplicable sense of oppression. The whispers included men's sighs, women's cries, and children's babble, mingling together as if from another world. Jacques snatched his hand back, glancing around the empty church. Was it an illusion? He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to steady his racing heart. When he opened his eyes again and leaned closer to the mirror, the whispers returned, seeming to emanate from the depths of the mirror, drifting into his mind through his ears. He strained to make out the words, but they remained unintelligible, leaving only a profound sense of exhaustion and despair, as if countless souls were trapped within the mirror, pouring out their suffering. He suddenly remembered the plague years, when the church had been filled with the sick and dying. Their painful moans and desperate cries were eerily similar to these whispers. He stepped back hastily, covering the mirror with the black cloth once more, and the whispers vanished instantly. Leaning against the wall, he gasped for breath, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. He was certain it was no illusion. There was a terrible secret hidden within that mirror. The confession and mirror-gazing ceremony was soon held. The church was packed with villagers, even the doorways and windows crowded. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, mold, and faint incense. Lord Renard stood beside the mirror, dressed in a magnificent brocade robe, his long sword enhancing his authority. His confidants scattered throughout the church, their eyes scanning the crowd warily, as if monitoring for something. The ceremony began with Lord Renard stepping forward to the mirror, bowing his head devoutly and reciting confession verses. His voice was loud and emotional, as if he were a true believer. The villagers lined up, each approaching the mirror in turn to confess their sins, some admitting to stealing a neighbor's egg, others to being disrespectful to their parents, and some to abandoning sick relatives during the plague. Everyone took it extremely seriously, as if participating in a life-or-death ritual. After confessing, they stared nervously at the mirror, waiting for God's guidance. For most, the mirror remained blank, but for a few, short lines of text appeared, either warnings or exhortations. Those who received warnings were terrified, falling to their knees immediately, kowtowing frantically and vowing to reform. Jacques stood beside the altar, watching everything, his doubts deepening. He observed closely everyone for whom text appeared on the mirror and discovered a shocking pattern. Most of them had clashed with Lord Renard's men or fallen behind on their rent payments to the Lord. For example, Thomas, a village farmer who had argued with the Lord's steward about rent a few days earlier, saw the text, "The greedy shall be punished with hunger," during his confession. Baker Pierre, who had refused to sell his bread to the Lord's men at a forced low price, was met with the warning, "The stingy shall lose all." Yet no matter how Lord Renard's confidants confessed, even admitting to theft or assault, the mirror remained completely unresponsive. A chill ran through Jacques' heart. He seemed to understand. Lord Renard was not revering the mirror. He was using it, exploiting the villagers' faith in God and fear of the plague to eliminate dissent and consolidate his power. After the ceremony, Jacques stopped one of Lord Renard's confidants, trying to ask about the mirror, but the man only gave him a cold look and said, "Father, tend to your own duties. God's will is not for us to question." With that, he turned and left. A few days later, a major incident occurred in the village. Alana, the young widow, was accused of practicing witchcraft. Alana's husband had died in the Black Death, leaving her to live alone in a small cottage on the western edge of the village. She rarely interacted with the other villagers, always walking with her head down, yet she possessed extensive knowledge of herbs, taught to her by her mother, a herbalist who had died early in the plague. Not only could Alana identify herbs, but she also helped village women with childbirth. During the plague, many pregnant women had faced danger when doctors dared not visit, and Alana had stepped in, saving countless lives. This time, Mary, a village woman, was having a difficult labor, writhing in agony. Her husband was at a loss and had no choice but to send for Alana. Alana arrived immediately, boiling water and preparing herbs, and after a whole night of effort, she finally helped Mary give birth safely. However, the baby was weak at birth, crying faintly, and soon passed away. Grief-stricken, Mary's husband, incited by neighbors, accused Alana of using witchcraft to kill the child. The child's family was devastated, and someone suddenly thought of the silver mirror. They rushed to the church, begging Lord Renard to let the mirror judge Alana. Lord Renard immediately led his men to Alana's cottage, arresting her and bringing her to the silver mirror in the church. Jacques hurried over as well. Looking at Alana, he saw her wearing a faded linen dress, her skirt stained with dirt and herb juice. Her face showed the exhaustion of a sleepless night, dark circles under her eyes, yet her gaze was steady, without the slightest trace of panic. "I did not practice witchcraft," she said calmly, her voice hoarse but firm. "Mary had a malpositioned fetus. I only used herbs to ease her pain and tried my best to adjust the baby's position. The child died of congenital weakness. It had nothing to do with me." Jacques knew Alana was telling the truth. He had witnessed her midwifery before. Her techniques were skilled, and she was kind-hearted, never charging a fee for her services and always leaving herbs to help the mothers recover. But the surrounding villagers refused to believe her, their judgment clouded by fear and grief, and they accused her relentlessly. Lord Renard said nothing, only gesturing for her to stand before the mirror. All eyes focused on the mirror's surface. After a moment, grayish-white text slowly appeared. "Practices witchcraft with infant blood. It's witchcraft. She really is a witch!" The villagers shouted angrily, some picking up stones and preparing to hurl them at Alana. A small stone grazed her cheek, hitting the wall behind her with a pop. Alana flinched instinctively, a trace of injustice flashing in her eyes. Yet she did not back down. Provoked by the stone, the villagers grew even more agitated, raising more stones, and the air filled with a violent energy. Jacques knew that if things continued, Alana would be stoned to death. "Stop!" Jacques rushed to stand in front of Alana. "We cannot condemn her as a witch based solely on words in a mirror. Father, this is God's will. Are you trying to shelter a witch?" Lord Renard said coldly, his eyes filled with menace. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding villagers joined in the chorus. "Sheltering a witch is opposing God. Drive the father away too." Jacques looked into Lord Renard's malicious eyes, then at the angry villagers, and knew he could not stop them. In the villagers' minds, the mirror's judgment had surpassed all else, and any doubt was deemed betrayal of God. He could only watch helplessly as the villagers swarmed around Alana, tearing at her clothes and dragging her out of the village. Alana did not struggle. She only glanced back at Jacques, her eyes showing no resentment, only a faint trace of disappointment. That night, Jacques tossed and turned in his sleep, lying in his small bed in the church. His mind was filled with the image of Alana being driven away and her final look of disappointment. He remembered how carefully she had attended to childbirths, boiling scissors to sterilize them, comforting the mothers gently, how she had cured many villagers of minor ailments with her herbs, providing free remedies for sick children and elderly villagers with aching backs, always carefully instructing them on usage. How could such a person be a witch? The more he thought, the more suspicious he became. Lord Renard had been too eager to act. as if he had been waiting for an excuse to get rid of Alana. He suddenly remembered that Alana's husband had been a tenant farmer who had clashed with Lord Renard's men after refusing to pay additional rent. Shortly afterward, he had contracted the plague and died. Could this incident have been deliberately orchestrated by Lord Renard? To take revenge on Alana's husband and eliminate someone who refused to submit to him? The thought sent a shiver down Jacques' spine, and he decided to go find Alana to get to the truth. The abandoned cottage outside the village was dilapidated, with several holes in the roof and cracks covering the walls. Cold wind howled through the gaps, like the wailing of ghosts. Alana was sitting by a small fire, sorting herbs by its faint light. The fire burned weakly, fueled by a few pieces of dry wood, emitting little heat. In front of her lay a tattered wooden tray filled with various herbs: mint, wormwood, dandelions, and some plants Jacques did not recognize. Her movements were gentle, as if handling treasures. When she saw Jacques enter, she was not surprised, only lifting her head calmly, her eyes regaining their earlier resolve. "Father, have you come to judge me?" "No, I have come to apologize," Jacques said guiltily. "I failed to protect you." Alana shook her head slightly. "It is not your fault, Father. I knew they would come for me sooner or later." She set aside the herbs and looked at Jacques. "Do you also believe that mirror is a holy relic of God?" Jacques hesitated for a moment, then voiced his doubts. "I am not sure. I cannot help but feel that the mirror has an unusual connection to Lord Renard. It is not just him. There is also the church hierarchy," Alana said, lowering her voice and glancing warily at the door to ensure no one was listening. "I once overheard a conversation between the bishop's attendants. Last month, the bishop's men secretly came to the village and met with Lord Renard in the castle all night. I was gathering herbs near the castle and happened to hear a few words. They seemed to be talking about this mirror, calling it a divine tool that would help them eliminate dissent and consolidate power. They also mentioned tributes, saying they would take half of the village's harvest as tribute to the bishop." Anger tinged Alana's voice. Her father had been injured by the Lord's men for being unable to pay exorbitant rents and tributes, and had not survived the plague. Jacques was shocked, as if struck by a bolt of lightning. He remembered a diary left by the previous priest, hidden on the top shelf of the church's bookshelf, weighed down by a wooden plank. He had discovered it by chance. Most of the diary contained prayers and notes on parish management, but one page vaguely mentioned that the bishop had sent someone to inspect an ancient holy relic in the church, instructing the previous priest to keep it safe and not speak of it. At the time, he had thought it was just an ordinary religious relic, but now he realized it must have been the silver mirror. The bishop and Lord Renard were colluding, using the mirror to plunder the villagers' wealth and suppress those who refused to obey them. His faith was shattered. He had always believed the church was God's representative on earth, a force for salvation, but now it seemed the church hierarchy was just as greedy and corrupt as secular lords. "I can shelter you," Jacques suddenly said. "There is a storage room in the church courtyard. It is simple, but at least it will shield you from the wind and rain." Looking into Jacques' sincere eyes, Alana's expression softened, and she nodded. From then on, Alana hid in the church's storage room, helping Jacques tidy the church, clean, polish the holy statues, and continue her study of herbs. She set up a small corner in the storage room for her herbs and simple tools, venturing out at night to gather plants from the countryside. Jacques, in turn, used his role in leading the ceremonies to observe the silver mirror more closely. He noticed that the text on the mirror always changed around the full moon, as if influenced by the moonlight. Sometimes the prophecies were extremely vague, phrases like "the reaper shall come" or "darkness approaches," leaving people unsure of who or what they referred to, or whether they were good or bad. Whenever such ambiguous prophecies appeared, Lord Renard would deliberately misinterpret them, directing the blame at those he wished to suppress. Once, when the mirror displayed, "The Reaper shall come," Lord Renard declared to the villagers that the Reaper is God's messenger to punish the lazy, then sent his men to seize grain from several farmers who were not particularly hard-working. More importantly, he repeatedly saw Lord Renard's confidants loitering near those mentioned in the prophecies shortly after they appeared. Once, the mirror showed the baker skimps on ingredients, and soon after, one of Lord Renard's men went to the baker's shop, seizing all his flour on the pretext of blaspheming God. Jacques secretly followed and watched as the man, instead of delivering the flour to the church, smuggled it back to Lord Renard's castle. On another occasion, the mirror displayed, "The drunkard shall be punished," pointing to John, the village drunkard. Lord Renard's men deliberately got John intoxicated, then threw him into a village mud pit, leaving him there all night. The next day, John caught a severe cold and nearly died. Jacques told Alana all his discoveries, his voice filled with anger and disappointment. "They are manipulating everything," Jacques told Alana. "Those prophecies may not be God's will at all. They are tools to suppress dissent and plunder wealth." Alana nodded, her expression grave. "I have noticed something strange too. Once, while gathering herbs outside the village, I saw one of Lord Renard's men secretly release a venomous snake into a villager's field. That villager had been predicted by the mirror the previous day to encounter disaster. He was an honest man, but had incurred Lord Renard's wrath for being a few days late with his rent last year. I wanted to stop him, but I was afraid of exposing myself and could only watch helplessly. Later, the villager was bitten by the snake while working in the field. He survived, but lost a leg." Alana's voice carried a trace of guilt. She felt she had failed to help the man. "Additionally, I have noticed that when the text appears on the mirror, the temperature around it drops significantly, and there is a faint smell of sulfur, as if it comes from hell." Both fell silent. They were becoming increasingly aware that a great secret lay behind the silver mirror. Meanwhile, in a 22nd century time monitoring station, Recorder 9 was facing an inquiry from the Ethics Committee. The monitoring station was a massive structure floating in space, surrounded by large display screens showing images from different eras: ancient Roman battlefields, Egyptian pyramids, and medieval villages. The glow of the screens illuminated Recorder 9's face, making him look unusually pale. He wore a white uniform emblazoned with the Time Ethics Committee emblem, and the console in front of him flickered with data and light, complex formulas and graphs scrolling across the screens. The station was quiet, except for the hum of the console and the voices of the Ethics Committee members echoing. Experiment 7A, Community Morality Observation Device 07, was originally designed solely to observe and probabilistically predict the fates of villagers in a mid-14th century French village. Is that correct? The chairman of the Ethics Committee asked, his voice coming through the speaker, emotionless. "Yes, Your Honor," Recorder 9 replied, his voice nervous as he instinctively clenched his fists. "Then why has there been interference with reality?" The chairman's voice suddenly rose, carrying an undeniable authority. "Monitoring data shows that your device emitted infrasound waves to induce anxiety in the villagers and used quantum traction technology to guide wild animals to predicted locations, resulting in multiple deaths. This constitutes a serious violation of Article 3, Section 7 of the Time Ethics Act, which prohibits any form of interference with the natural progression of past time spaces." As soon as the chairman finished speaking, relevant data reports appeared on the screen, clearly documenting the timing and intensity of the infrasound emissions, as well as the movement trajectories of the wild animals, each piece of data implicating Recorder 9's device. Sweat broke out on Recorder 9's forehead. This was not my intention. A space-time turbulence caused a malfunction in the equipment, and I have been doing my best to repair it." "Malfunction?" The chairman sneered. "We have evidence that you discovered the equipment's anomalies long ago but failed to report them, instead attempting to cover them up. Did you think you could deceive us?" Recorder 9 slumped in his chair, his face ashen and his body limp. He had indeed discovered the equipment's anomalies a month earlier, detecting faint infrasound emissions from the device, but had paid little attention to it, even feeling excited by the accuracy of the device's predictions. His research had long been dismissed by colleagues, who mocked his moral archaeology as pseudoscience, arguing that observing past moral behavior to guide the future was meaningless. This experiment was his key to promotion. He had to succeed. Initially, the device's interference was minor, merely making the villagers feel slightly anxious, with no serious consequences. But as time passed, the interference became more pronounced, eventually guiding wild animals and leading to villagers' deaths. Only then did he realize the gravity of the situation, but he dared not report it. Afraid of losing years of hard work, facing ridicule from colleagues, and losing everything he had. He had clung to the hope of repairing the device himself, but the more he tried, the worse it got, and the equipment spiraled further out of control. I only wanted the experiment to succeed," he muttered. "I never thought it would turn out like this. Your so-called success is built on destroying the causal chain of past time spaces." The chairman's voice was filled with anger. "Now, terminate the experiment immediately and await further investigation." Yes, Recorder 9 replied weakly. After the Ethics Committee's inquiry, Recorder 9 was left alone in the monitoring station. He stared at the screen showing 14th century Valentine village, where Father Jacques stood before the silver mirror, his brows furrowed, his eyes filled with doubt and concern. Regret and fear flooded his heart. He had no idea what consequences his actions would bring. He remembered his mentor's words before the experiment began. Time is an irreversible river. Even the smallest interference can trigger a towering wave. We are observers, not creators, and certainly not judges. At the time, he had dismissed the warning, believing he could control everything. But now he realized he was nothing but an arrogant fool. He reached out, wanting to touch Valentine Village on the screen, but his fingertips only met cold glass. He looked at the villagers on the screen. Gaunt, their eyes filled with fear, having already endured the plague, they now faced disaster brought on by his device. A deep sense of guilt washed over him, and he couldn't help but cover his face, his shoulders trembling slightly. Father Jacques did not give up his investigation. He remembered there was an abandoned secret chamber beneath the church, which the previous priest had told him about, said to contain ancient church manuscripts. He suspected that the secret of the silver mirror might be found there. One late night, after the villagers had fallen asleep, Father Jacques took an oil lamp and quietly went to the church courtyard. The night was thick, like unfaded ink, with only a few sparse stars twinkling faintly in the sky. The old locust tree in the courtyard swayed in the wind, its branches casting shadows like devil's claws, flickering on the ground. The entrance to the secret chamber was hidden beneath the old locust tree, covered by a heavy blue stone slab carved with complex religious symbols, which had blurred over the years due to wind and rain. Father Jacques knelt down, using all his strength to move the stone slab. Its scraping against the ground emitted a harsh creak-creak sound, particularly sharp in the silent night. He glanced around cautiously to ensure no one was watching, then descended the steep stone steps. The steps were narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and the walls were damp, covered in moss, emitting a moist, musty smell. The oil lamp's light was faint, illuminating only a small area in front of him, and tiny dust particles floated in the air, dancing in the light. He opened the wooden chests one by one. Inside were indeed many ancient manuscripts and books, along with some tattered religious items, crosses, holy statues, prayer books, and the like. Most of the manuscripts and books had turned yellow, their pages brittle and liable to crumble at the slightest touch. Father Jacques flipped through them carefully, fearing he might damage the precious materials. His fingers brushed the yellowed pages, the Latin text on some pages already blurred, requiring careful scrutiny to read. Time passed slowly. Half the oil in the lamp had burned away, and his eyes grew tired. Just as he was about to give up, he suddenly found a Latin manuscript tucked at the bottom of a tattered wooden chest. Its cover was damaged, the edges rotting in places, and faded ink read, "Record of Holy Relics at Valentine Church." His heart raced, as if he had found a lifeline. He hastily opened the manuscript, which detailed the origin and purpose of all the church's holy relics. When he turned to the last few pages, he found a record of the silver mirror. Silver mirror behind the altar, not locally produced, suspected to be of foreign origin. There is a hidden compartment behind the mirror containing a rare treasure, which can only be opened in a special way. Overjoyed, Father Jacques immediately took the manuscript back to the altar. Following the instructions in the manuscript, he found a hidden button on the mirror's frame. With a gentle press, the wall behind the mirror suddenly let out a click, and a stone brick slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment, there was no rare treasure, only a metal plate, neither iron nor stone, roughly the size of a palm and less than an inch thick. The metal plate was dark gray, its surface as smooth as a mirror, without any patterns, and cold to the touch. Even under the oil lamp, it did not reflect the slightest light. Father Jacques held it in his hand. It felt surprisingly heavy, heavier than an iron plate of the same size. The edges were sharp, as if carefully polished. Strange symbols were carved on it, neither Latin nor any language he recognized, resembling twisted lines and dots. Some curved, some straight, others spiral-shaped, exuding an eerie aura. Father Jacques held the metal plate close to the oil lamp, examining the symbols closely. The more he looked, the stranger they seemed, not man-made, but as if they had formed naturally, as if the metal plate itself had been born with them. Father Jacques held the metal plate carefully. The moment his fingers fully wrapped around it, the silver mirror suddenly emitted an intense white light, brighter than ever before, like sharp swords cutting through the darkness, illuminating the entire church. Father Jacques closed his eyes instinctively, raising his hand to shield himself from the glare, feeling a stabbing pain in his eyes. He could hear the air hissing around him, like the sound of electric current. When he opened his eyes again, he saw an unprecedented length of text appearing on the mirror's surface. Dense grayish-white lines filling the entire mirror, neatly arranged as if carefully typeset. The familiar hum returned, louder than before, like countless bees buzzing in his ears, making his head ring. Drawing closer, he saw the text was divided into two parts. One part was in Latin, detailing the terms of the contract between Lord Renard and the bishop to divide the parishioners' donations, including the amount of each donation and the split ratio. Lord Renard taking 60%, the bishop 40%, and even their plan to use the silver mirror to create divine punishment to plunder the villagers' wealth. Phrases like, "use the mirror to create panic and force villagers to pay more tributes," and label dissenters as sinners and seize their property, filled the page, each word dripping with greed and evil. The other part consisted of strange symbols, identical to those on the metal plate, flashing as if transmitting a message. Father Jacques' hands trembled as he memorized the Latin text word for word, anger and disappointment overwhelming him. The church and Lord he had always believed in were so corrupt, exploiting the villagers' faith to plunder and oppress them, treating them like lambs to be slaughtered. Father Jacques was utterly shocked. He finally understood the so-called Mirror of God was nothing but a tool for Lord Renard and the church hierarchy to enrich themselves. Just then, the strange symbols suddenly changed, gradually transforming into words he could understand. "Observers, you judge in the name of data. How are you different from us?" Father Jacques froze. Who were the observers? What did this mean? Before he could think, the text on the mirror changed again. this time revealing a secret about someone from the 22nd century. Recorder 9 falsified experimental data to cover up fatal errors caused by equipment malfunctions, resulting in the deaths of 3 research assistants. The words struck Father Jacques like a sledgehammer. Though he did not understand terms like 22nd century or experimental data, he sensed that the mirror was connected to another world, and that people in that world were doing something similar to Lord Renard and his cohorts. At the same time, in the 22nd century monitoring station, Recorder 9 suddenly noticed something wrong with the screen. The image of Valentine Village had been replaced by a view of his own office. On the screen, he was falsifying experimental data, changing records of the device's interference with reality to normal observation data, and destroying evidence of the equipment malfunction. He threw a report documenting the anomalies into a shredder, which crunched it into pieces with a whir. "No, that's impossible!" Recorder 9 shouted in terror, his voice filled with despair. He never imagined his secret would be projected into the past, let alone recorded by his own device. He frantically tried to operate the console to shut down the equipment, but found it completely out of control. On the console screen, his own secrets continued to appear, along with the hidden scandals of the ethics committee members, some accepting bribes, some using time observation technology for personal gain, and even some interfering with past time spaces to alter the course of historical events. Warning! Warning! The space-time causal chain is on the verge of collapse. The monitoring station's alarm blared suddenly, red warning lights flashing frantically in the room. The device has developed self-awareness and is now reversing the process, excavating the sins of future experimenters and projecting them into the past. Recorder 9 panicked completely, not knowing what to do. He could only watch as the images on the screen grew more chaotic, the 14th century Valentine Village and the 22nd century monitoring station seemingly connected by some invisible force. In Valentine Village, Lord Renard also saw the secrets about himself and the bishop displayed on the silver mirror. His face turned ashen, veins bulging on his forehead, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles whitened. His confidants, who had also seen the text, turned pale with fear. Lord Renard knew that if these secrets were revealed to the villagers, his rule would collapse entirely. They would rise up against him, tearing him to pieces. Fear and anger filled his heart. Anger that the mirror had betrayed him, exposing his secrets. Fear of losing his power and wealth. He immediately summoned his men, his voice hoarse with rage. "Gather everyone. We're gonna smash the mirror. It must be destroyed. My lord, are we really going to destroy the mirror of God?" One of his men asked cautiously. "What mirror of God? It's a devil's creation," Lord Renard roared. "It exposed our secrets. Destroy it." However, just as they approached the mirror with sledgehammers, text suddenly appeared on its surface, predicting Lord Renard's death. Trampled to death by his own horse on the castle steps, Lord Renard trembled violently, his legs giving way, and he nearly fell to his knees. The sledgehammer in his hand clattered to the ground with a dull thud. The villagers also saw the text, descending into even greater panic. Some believed the mirror was a manifestation of the devil, that the previous divine punishments had been temptations, and that now it was exposing the Lord's secrets to incite chaos. It must be destroyed immediately. Others insisted the mirror was still God's holy relic, that the text was a punishment for Lord Renard, proving its justice, and it should be preserved to continue judging sin. "Smash it! Smash it quickly! Don't destroy it! It's God's will." The villagers split into 2 factions, accusing and shoving each other, violence imminent. "We can't let this go on," Alana suddenly said, her eyes unusually determined. "The mirror is neither devil nor God. It's a trapped whistleblower, suffering itself." "A trapped whistleblower?" Father Jacques looked at her in confusion. "Yes," Alana nodded. It constantly exposes others' secrets but cannot control its own fate. Its existence has only been used as a tool. We don't need to destroy it. That would only worsen the chaos. We should cover it, cutting off its visual connection with people. That way, it can no longer influence us, and it can find peace. Father Jacques suddenly realized. He remembered a local legend that obsidian could seal souls. Perhaps covering the mirror with an obsidian slab would work. There's an obsidian slab in the village blacksmith shop, used for forging tools in the past. Let's fetch it quickly. Taking advantage of the villagers' chaos, the two slipped out of the church and ran to the abandoned blacksmith shop. The shop was covered in dust. The obsidian slab lay in the corner, roughly the same size as the silver mirror. Together, they lifted the slab and hurried back to the church. By then, violent clashes had erupted in the church. Villagers fought each other, punching, kicking, and wielding farm tools as weapons. Wooden sticks, hoes, sickles, even church candlesticks. Shouts, cries, and screams filled the air, echoing throughout the church. An old man was pushed to the ground, his forehead hitting the stone steps, blood streaming down. A woman was slashed in the arm with a sickle, crying out in pain. Lord Renard cowered behind a pillar, trembling with fear, muttering, "God have mercy," repeatedly. Father Jacques and Alana shouted, trying to stop the villagers, but their voices were quickly drowned out by the chaos. Father Jacques saw a villager raising a hoe to strike another and rushed to intervene, only to be roughly pushed aside, falling to the ground and scraping his arm, a burning pain spreading across his skin. There was no time to hesitate. They carried the obsidian slab to the silver mirror, which still glowed brightly, text continuing to appear. Father Jacques and Alana exchanged a glance, then together, with all their strength, covered the mirror with the obsidian slab. In an instant, the light vanished, and the eerie whispers fell silent. The church went suddenly quiet. The villagers froze, staring in astonishment at the mirror covered by the obsidian slab. The chaos gradually subsided. The villagers looked around at the scene. The overturned tables and chairs, shattered candlesticks, candle wax spilled across the floor, and injured villagers lying moaning on the ground. They looked at Father Jacques and Alana, their eyes filled with confusion and guilt. Father Jacques stood up, brushing the dust from his clothes, enduring the pain in his arm, and said loudly, "The mirror has been sealed. It will no longer influence us. We must let go of hatred and live in peace, not be ruled by fear and anger." His voice was hoarse but firm. The villagers fell silent, looking at the obsidian-covered mirror, then at their injured companions, overcome with remorse. Lord Renard took the opportunity to slip away, returning to his castle and never daring to venture out again. In the 22nd century monitoring station, Recorder 9 was astonished to see the screen return to normal and the alarm stop. He leaned closer to the display. In 14th century Valentine village, peace had been restored, and Father Jacques and Alana were comforting the villagers. The core of his device, once glowing brightly, was now dim and lifeless. Just then, the door to the monitoring station opened, and members of the ethics committee entered, followed by several guards in black uniforms. Recorder 9, for violating the Time Ethics Act and bringing the space-time causal chain to the brink of collapse, you are sentenced to permanent exile at the Time Ethics Isolation Station. The chairman announced, his voice cold and unwavering. Recorder 9 did not resist. He knew he deserved it. The guards approached, escorting him away. The Time Ethics Isolation Station was a desolate planet, covered in endless desert. He was led to a simple hut, empty except for a black mirror that displayed no images. "From today, this is your entire world," the guard said, then turned and left, leaving Recorder 9 alone. He walked to the black mirror, staring at his haggard reflection, overcome with despair. He knew he would be trapped here forever, with only the black mirror for company. through endless time. 3 years later, Valentine village had regained its former vitality. The fields were replanted with crops, and smiles returned to the villagers' faces. Father Jacques continued to oversee the church's affairs, while Alana had become the village's recognized herbalist and midwife, respected by all. The obsidian-covered silver mirror was moved to the church's secret chamber for storage, never to be touched again. Until one day, while tidying the secret chamber, Father Jacques noticed faint text appearing on the obsidian slab. Drawing closer, he saw two lines, one in medieval Latin, "I am you," and the other in strange symbols, identical to those he had seen on the metal plate years earlier. Father Jacques was shocked, suddenly understanding something. He took out paper and ink, drawing the symbols, then tried to decipher them. Though he could not fully comprehend their meaning, he sensed the message they conveyed. The experiment continues. He walked to the secret chamber's window, looking out at the vibrant village, his heart filled with complex emotions. He did not know how long the experiment would last, or what changes the future might bring. But he knew that as long as the villagers could let go of hatred and uphold kindness in their hearts, they would overcome any hardship. In the Time Ethics Isolation Station, Recorder 9 still sat before the black mirror day after day. Suddenly, faint text appeared on the mirror. In 22nd century script, the experiment continues. His body stiffened, fear filling his eyes. He realized the black mirror was likely the relocated core of the Community Morality Observation Device 07, and he himself had become part of the experiment. Moonlight streamed through the secret chamber's window, illuminating the obsidian slab, the two lines of text glowing clearly in the darkness. Across the vast gulf of time, between the distant past and the future, two men trapped before mirrors echoed each other in a strange harmony. Meanwhile, the villagers of Valentine village lived in peace, unaware that their fates were still being watched by an invisible eye, and that the cycle of secrets, power, and judgment had never truly ended.